How are you guys? It's hot. Oh my God. You guys are tough. Look at it. I'm like, yeah.
They actually came out despite the heat of the
Oh my goodness gracious.
All right. So good afternoon, everybody. Happy Labor Day to all of you here in the room and watching. And to you, oh famous author.
Well, thank you, dear. And to you, most famous bookseller.
Well, thank you.
And publisher. And I could go on forever.
Good. Actually, for those of you who are new, I didn't introduce myself. I'm just a little woman with a gravelly voice. I'm Barbara Peters, and I'm the owner of the Poison Pen, which will be 33 years old on October the 4th, with Mr. Sanford coming to celebrate with us. Hooray! So, we won't go into it, but it's an accidental bookstore. But anyway, I'm so glad that it's worked out as well as it has. And we have been with Craig for every single book. And he was here for Coldish. Do you remember with the second book, your publisher was hesitant to send you on a book tour? And Craig called me and he said, if I ride my motorcycle down, he said, will you have me at the Poison Pen? And I felt sort of irresponsible saying yes, you know, because you died on the highway. But nonetheless, did you actually, I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I did. But actually what they had done is like a lot of times whenever you start out in the business, you know, a lot of times what a publisher will do is they'll say local author events.
Right.
And so that's what they were going to do, was local author events. Well, we have 3 bookstores in Wyoming. Okay, and so it was like, okay, so this is not going to go very far then, I don't think. And so that's the point in time when I had this motorcycle that got about 85 miles to the gallon. And I thought, you know what, if I took off on that thing, I could cover a lot of ground. You know, it was back when gas was affordable, and so I did. I took up a great big Northwest tour and then down the West Coast, and then back up through the Inland Empire and back up again, and it was great. It was actually a fun trip. It really, was a wild one, but I had a great time doing it.
And here you are.
I know, until Judy had a fit and said, yeah, no, you're not going to go on a motorcycle for 7,000 miles every year. That's just not going to happen.
Good idea. So Craig is a wonderful example, the Walt Longmire series of television increasing your audience. And a lady just reminded me of your famous story about, there are books.
Yeah.
Right.
Gosh, yes.
Which I love, but it's definitely true. And it's also important to remember that the books are still the books, whatever the television is, right?
Right.
Because there are a number of...
2 separate but equal universes is the way I like to look at it.
And if they're not in parallel exactly, it's okay.
No, it's actually even better because, I had an awful lot of people that came up to me after the TV show got started, and they said, well, I would say things like, have you read the books? And they'd be like, no, I've seen the TV show. And I'm like, yeah, but you haven't read the books. And that's a different arc, different characters, different development, different all kinds of things. And so in many ways, I think, they were doing me a favor. Well, first of all, like that, whenever you take a 42-minute teleplay and try and draw that from a 350, 400-page book, you're going to leave some stuff out. It's just, there's no other way of doing it. And so they kind of cherry picked at bits and pieces from all the different books to go from, and then of course once they develop their own kind of arc of character, then they have their own storylines they want to work with. But it actually did me a world of good for them to kind of go off in a little bit different direction than from what I was doing. Because then people would have a reason to actually read the books rather than just watch the television.
No, that's absolutely true. And some things that you can do in books you can't reasonably do in a video platform. So, I think it's great. Did any of you watch Dark Winds, the new Tony? Wasn't it interesting to see the character from Craig's series come to life with Joe Leaphorn? So how did that,
of all the things I'm proud of the 6 seasons, that we accomplished, with Longmire, and to be honest with you, we're still one of the top 10 to 20 shows on Netflix every week. And that's 6 years after we ceased production. So interestingly enough, I think, Robert Taylor, the guy that plays Walt, and he said that the contract comes up, with Netflix in November. So it'll be interesting to see what Warner Brothers does at that period in time. Because they produce, Netflix produces these incredibly huge, multi-million-dollar shows with all these big stars and all this stuff. And there's our little cowboy and Indian show creeping along right there in the top 10 to 20 years, 6 years after they stopped production like that. And so it's kind of interesting to see, where it's going to happen like that. But then again, we've been scheduled to be off the air on Netflix about 4 or 5 times now, 4 or 5 years in a row, and they hold on to it. because they realize that like repeat viewing audiences like that will watch it over and over again. So, and that's golden as far as like, the streaming services are concerned. So we'll see what happens. I mean, who knows? Like that, we're just
I
have to wait
keep
and see.
hoping it will come back to life on another platform, right? Cause
Yeah. You would think.
Well, I think the actors would really, would really like to do
Oh
it.
yeah, they're all in favor. Like
course
they're
they
all
are.
in favor. The other thing was I didn't answer your question, like which is that Zahn McLaren and like getting all these wonderful roles like that he's getting. I mean, probably one of the things I'm probably maybe more proud of than maybe anything else that Longmire accomplished is I think we gave more roles to native actors than the rest of Hollywood combined for 6 years. That's really cool. And now a lot of them are getting these incredible jobs, and I'm just kind of tickled to death, and especially Zahn. He's one of the sweetest guys you could ever meet in your entire life. When we started doing Longmire days, we made a rule that you could bring a significant other. The actors could bring a significant other to Longmire days if they wanted. And we still remember talking to Zahn on the phone when he called up Judy and said, "Hey, Judy, would it be okay if I brought my mom to Longmire days?" And Judy was like, "You go." So
He has a wonderful face. I really enjoy, watching him.
very expressive,
Do that.
extraordinarily expressive.
And but that's a kind of interesting thing because the original, we're digressing, but we always do, so just hang on, we'll get to this. But the original Tony Hillerman TV adaptations were not very successful. And now there's a new thing coming to life, and as a consultant, new cast and all. So it can happen. Longmire can take on a second life. And even if it's not all the original actors, it can still roll forward.
There was a talk I was doing with Robert, like at Longmire days, and he surprised me last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago. Like it must have been 19, I think it was. But he was talking to the audience like that, and he says, "Well, there will be a lot of other Walt Longmires. There'll be other, Absaroka County sheriffs and all this kind of stuff." And I'm like, really? It never dawned on me there'd be another one, for God's sake. I didn't think there'd be one, let alone more, And he looks at me like that and he goes, "Oh, yeah." He says, "And there'll probably be a lot of different guys like that that'll play Walt Longmire." And then he smiled. He goes, "But I was first."
I love that. I mean, I have a daughter who's a Star Trekkie. How many years is Star Trek? I mean, it's never going to go away, right? It seems sort of interesting thing. Well, let's talk about Helen Beck. I've advertised this as Walt Longmire as you've never seen him before, and I think that's true.
Yeah, it is. Like you guys know, thank goodness, I know you guys well enough to know like that. You can get stuck in a rut, whenever you start writing a series of books. That was one of the things that worried me, a great deal whenever I started writing the Walt books, because I thought, okay, I don't want to get into a formula, with these books. Like I want to do something different with each one. And so I've attempted that. I've tried to do something different with each one. I was kind of forced into it from the very get-go like that, because it dawned on me by book 2, how many people can you kill in the least populated county in the least populated state in Wyoming? And I thought, and have it still be realistic, like that, for God's sakes. Like it was rapidly becoming, high criminal number 1. And so I thought, okay, well, then, Walt's going to have to go other places like that. And so what I started doing at that point in time, I started doing Walt like a ball team. He was like home and away. I would like be in Absaroka County, there'd be a case, like, and then I would send him out. Because the other thing that kind of cracks me up in an awful lot of crime fiction, there are all these protagonists that do these most amazing things, and then by the time, you get to the next book, everybody's had collective amnesia and forgotten all about it, and they're just like back at the desk doing their job. And that's just not the way it would work. I mean, if you were able to have an ability to like break cold cases, if you were able to break cases that nobody else could or something like that, it's not the way it's portrayed, a lot of times in Hollywood with law enforcement. It's kind of like all hands on deck. It's everybody's in the foxhole together like that. And if you can get somebody to come help you with a case or help you with a situation, then you're going to call them up. Well, especially sheriffs. Sheriffs are really good at that, like that, because it's a much more personal form of law enforcement like that. And, and all 23 sheriffs in Wyoming are on a first name basis, I can guarantee you, like that. And I saw that in action with one of the first, meetings I had with Larry Kirkpatrick, who was the sheriff there in Johnson County. And I remember sitting in his office one time, and he had the situation where he needed to go out on the Powder River and ask somebody some questions or something like this. And it was, you always have to ask, permission. You always have to say, like, hey, I'm coming into your county. I'm going to ask some questions and all this. And so he called up the sheriff over in Campbell County, and he said, I need to knock on some doors over there and ask some questions. Do you mind? And the sheriff from Campbell County, said, he had him on speakerphone. He goes, hell, Larry, I'll pay for your gas. And so, that kind of gives you an indication like that of how you can spread it out and do things a little bit differently like that. And I had a good time. The third book actually took place in Philadelphia,
right.
The fourth book took place, half of it, in Vietnam in 1968. And so it kind of early on, I started doing things a little bit differently like that and really kind of stretch, the book so that I was doing something different. And the key element of that, of course, is to have a readership that will follow along with you. And not be upset.
To Mexico, for example?
Yeah, into Mexico, at another one like that, and we'll enjoy at the fact that you're doing something different. There are going to be an awful lot of readers that take comfort in the same characters doing the same things, the same time, and things don't change and all that. I can't do that. That's just, it's not possible for me. It would drive me nuts. I'd go back to digging ditches or something like that. And so it's nice to have a readership like you guys that jumps on the horse and says, yeah, let's go. And this is another one that's a little odd. It starts out a little odd. Walt wakes up in this town, Fort Pratt, Montana, named for Richard Henry Pratt, who was the designer of the Indian boarding school system and famous for a couple of different things. The first one being that he's the one that is famous for the phrase, kill the Indian, save the man. The whole idea being that if you took children from the reservations away from their families and away from the culture that they were born into and grew up in and put them in a mainstream indoctrination with these boarding schools to make them more, generally, a part of the mainstream of society. I think his motivations were good. It's just the practice, it just didn't work out very well. And we're seeing some of these horrible, results, especially, most recently. Deb Haaland just came out, with a report. There were 503 of these boarding schools here in the United States, but what happened up in Canada, where they're finding these mass graves, where hundreds of children, they died and were buried and never, sent no notice of them. Nothing was sent back to their families, to even let them know what happened to them or anything. So it's kind of horrifying. And I have to admit that when I go fishing, I would go up in this one section in Montana, go up to the Bighorn River that. And when you take the cut across the Crow Reservation and cut back down to Fort Smith, you're going to go by this little town, St. Xavier Mission. And the old rectory from St. Xavier Mission, it used to be there, and it was this stone building that, it was a rectory that could hold 150 children at one point in time. And I got to be honest with you, the windows are all broken out of it. The weeds have all grown up over top of it and everything. I remember, going there and fishing in the 1980s. This is a period in time in that part of the country where people literally would freeze to death if they were outside, left outside, and didn't have shelter. Nobody ever went in that building, ever. Nobody ever did. And to me, it kind of held a resonance. Every time I drive by it, I would look and see it, and think about, what had gone on there. And so when Walt, finds himself in Fort Pratt, Montana, he wakes up out in the middle of the street. He's laying out there in the middle of the street. And there's a couple of things, first off, to give you some indications of what's going on. First of all, he's wearing a sheepskin coat. He's wearing a sheepskin coat they cut off of him in the cold dish 17 books ago. He wakes up, he's got $2 silver over his eyes. He picks them off. We all know what that means, And so he lumbers up and looks around doesn't recognize where he is or anything sees the lights on in this little cafe on the side of the street there. He even looks down the street and there's a marquee for a theater down there, and the movie they're showing is Support Your Local Sheriff, And he gets up, wanders up onto the sidewalk, pushes open the door and walks in. And there's a waitress there, and she turns around and looks at him and Walter introduces him. He doesn't introduce himself but, he says, I think I could use a cup of coffee. She pours him a cup of coffee and she introduces herself. Her name is Martha. And she looks vaguely familiar. And Walt can't remember his name. Can't remember who he is. Doesn't know why he's there. Doesn't know anything. And so it sets him off on the first investigation to find out, A, who he is, B, why he's there, and then the latter investigation to find out, why it is that he came there in the first place. And of course, in Daughter of the Morning Star, there's that part where he's talking to Iron Bull, the Crow rancher, there along the river, and he looks at him and everybody seems to know this town, Fort Pratt, up in Montana, but nobody seems to know where it is. They don't seem to know exactly, where it is. Whenever Walt says, this town, Fort Pratt, they always go, yeah, I know Fort Pratt. And Walt's like, well, where is it? And they go, oh, well, you go up towards no, it's not near Lame Deer. Well, you go on up toward Chico Hot Springs. No, it's not near there either. Nobody can remember exactly where this town is. And so whenever Iron Bull looks at him like that, he says, something's going wrong. Something's weird about this. This girl's disappeared. We found her. We know what happened to her, but there's something else going on here too. And Walt decides to go to Fort Pratt, Montana by the time we get to the end of Daughter of the Morning Star. And by the time Hellenbach opens up, he's there.
And you knew it all along.
Yeah,
I know. Not an accident.
I did. And there's, one of the elements that's kind of fun is that spirituality that's really kind of important in the books. A lot of it because, my friends up on the Northern Cheyenne, the Crow Reservation, that's an essential part of their day-to-day life. It's got to be, it's a part of everything in their lives. And so I remember sitting on the porch with Charles Whiteman, and he was a tribal elder up there, and he's actually the character that I based Lonnie Littlebird off of. Because he was famous for falling asleep during meetings. And that's how he got elected chief. Which, from what I understand, happens a lot of times. You wake up and suddenly you're the chief. And anyway, I remember sitting on his front porch one time, and his grandkids were out playing around past the corral, towards the tree line like that. It was getting dark. And I remember, Charles going, saying to them like that, he said, you better come back here to the house. The Evoetse Hail Mese will get you. And, my Cheyenne's, a little workable at least. And so I heard all those words and I knew what they all were except for that phrase, Evoetse Hail Mese. And I said, well, and I knew the literal translation, it meant wandering without. And so I asked Charles, I said, Charles, what is that? What is that? And he goes, oh, it's a boogeyman. He said, it's a boogeyman that, we use to scare the kids. If they go out too far or get too far away, we can scare them to come back. And he says, and that's what we do. We call in the Evoetse Hail Mese. And so, I didn't see him for about a month or two like that. But the next time I saw him, that had been preying on my mind, that whole time. And I finally asked him, I said, the next time I saw him, I said, well, Charles, you don't mind me asking. I said, have you ever thought about where this Evoetse Hail Mese, could have come from? And he goes, he says, I have been. He says, since we had that conversation he says, I have kind of rolled it over in my mind He says, I've got a theory on that. And I said, well, I'd love to hear your theory. And he said, well, you got to remember that back in the day, we didn't have prisons. We didn't have police departments or anything like that. If somebody did something bad enough that, you couldn't tolerate them, within, a civilized society, he said, we banished them. He said, we banished them to the wilderness. And it was basically a death sentence is what it was. And I was like, okay. He says, well, what if there was something out there? What if there was something out there that collected all those souls that nobody else wanted? That were hungry for, human companionship. What if it collected all those souls and put all those souls together and carried them away? And I thought, that's scary. And then I started thinking about it and I thought, okay, well, what would be the best feeding ground for something like that? And I thought, one of those boarding schools where those young souls are there, neglected, abused, and ready to be devoured. And so I thought, let's just send Walt on, because Walt's good at going where angels fear to tread. It should be above his door, at the Absaroka County Sheriff's Department. But yeah, and I kind of sent him out against a pretty bad, situation like that, and a very formidable adversary. And hopefully you guys will enjoy it.
So you seasoned readers know that if Henry Standing Bear is in a book, something very odd is likely to happen. Right? Yep. So the minute Henry shows up, you go, oh, okay.
And that was something new too, because we
haven't seen Henry for a little.
Well, no, it's not that so much as it's interesting because the mainstream of the book, of course, is first person. You're in first person in Walt's head. Even when Walt doesn't know who Walt is, you're in Walt's head. You have to find out what's going on, what's happening. But then, as the chapters continue, that every chapter begins with Henry and Vic. And they're written in third person. This is the first time I've ever written in another tense like that, and they're in third person. And so they're looking for Walt. and they're in this town. They're in this town, Fort Pratt, like that, trying
But
to
you
find
have to
him.
do that. Walt can't tell his own story and doesn't even know who he is.
Exactly,
And,
like that. You know, well, it might be a completely different time, and realization like that for that character too, like that. And so it was interesting. It was interesting to do, and interesting to see the two of those characters like at working together to try and find Walt and find out what's happening here too.
So Craig told me for months, this is a strange book, he said. I'm not sure you're going to like it. So you can imagine. Actually, this is what I get to read, which is an advanced reading copy. See, it's a typescript, and it's all bound together because I have to read this way in advance of this conversation, right? Otherwise, I couldn't be talking to Craig. And sometimes what can go wrong is that the author changes things. So the book I read isn't necessarily the book that you're going to read, which is unnerving. And sometimes the whole dust jacket, this one happens to match, is completely different. So sometimes I come down here to do an event and I look at the book and I think, oh my God, I haven't read it. What am I going to do?
I'm going to make this up as I go along.
That's right. Yeah. Oh.
But a lot of times it's also interesting too, like that, because now they've gotten to the point where they're doing a lot of the electronic arcs. So
I can't read them.
They don't even print arcs a lot of the time.
My mind, that's why I get typescripts. I have a mind that I can remember everything I've read. I have an eidetic memory. I can't remember anything electronic. If I read on a Kindle, whatever, which is basically just an electronic scroll, I'm dead. But I can remember on what page I read things, so I have to have, so what they do is they send me PDFs, and which my husband can print out, and then they come with all this thing like I have to promise, that I'll never
hand that out to anybody.
Last year,
never show
when
it to
we were going to do an event with John Grisham, I said, I probably ought to read the John Grisham before I talk to it. And then this thing appeared in my inbox, and I thought, well, let's see. I could sell it on eBay for $1,000 or something, or I could read it and talk to John Grisham. I probably can't do both. But I mean, it's interesting how trusting.
I want your printer ink budget is what I want. Like that.
Well, my husband is really sweet about doing all that for me. Yeah, he's a great guy. He's home cooking dinner for Craig and Judy. You think that he came to see you, but in truth, he really came to eat dinner with Rob and me and play with the puppies. But we've been doing this for a long time. We've had a lot of meals together, haven't we?
We have some very fine ones.
We have, some of which cooked by Craig and Judy up at their home in Wyoming, which is a lot of fun. They have a wonderful, I've actually been to Cross, found the driveway, which is not that hard. When it's all right. Population.
I am.
25. I've been drinking. I was telling them, Larry King gave me this weird stuff. It's called throat coat because I've been having trouble with my voice, and it's licorice flavored, but if you drink it, it's supposed to help. So that's what I was doing, gulping this down. And I think it has helped a little bit. We'll see. I don't know. It's just an artifact of being old, as your voice isn't as good as it once was, right? But anyway, so Craig has me, worried about what it is I'm going to read. And how much of what I'm going to read can I reveal to you when I'm enticing you to come down here and listen to Craig or buy the book, because spoilers are cruel. And this is a very hard book to write about without giving it away.
Yeah, it is.
So what I basically said is that most of you will figure out what's going on with Walt at some point before Walt figures it out. I think you will. But it's getting there, and it's Walt getting there, and it's Vic and Henry getting there that make it really interesting.
Well, it's in many ways, I think one of the reviewers reviewed it and said it's kind of a greatest hits album is what it is, because you're going to see an awful lot of characters you thought you were never going to see again. Like that, and that's very hesitant, for Walt, like that, as he starts putting things together like that, and realizing that, just about everybody in this town is dead. As a matter of fact, a very large portion of them are people he's killed, and so the question becomes, why are they here, and why is he here, and what do they want from him, and all of this. So I don't think I gave away too much with that, did I?
No, and the Indian school thing is every time I now drive, because I'm in Santa Fe where we have property and spend part of the summer, the old Indian school is being revamped, and the one here is no longer a functioning Indian school. I'm not entirely sure what they're doing, but I keep wondering, soon they're going to change the name of the road. I will not be at all surprised if it turns out like Piestwa Peak, which used to be Squaw Peak and so forth. And, you know, and I'm okay with that, except Indian School is such a landmark here. It's going to be, I don't know that I will ever adjust to a new name for it, but, you know.
Well, also, like, I think to a certain extent, I mean, when you start erasing portions of history, that doesn't mean that those portions of history go away. Like,
That's
and so
right.
it is a kind of a nice reminder, you know, about, you know, pieces of history like that go on like that. And, you know, that, you know, for me, like that is, you know, one of the key elements, I think, to this book, like that was is that, you know, I mean, the last Indian boarding school didn't close up until 1969.
Right.
That's how long. They went from 1819 to 1969, for goodness sake. Like, and
Yeah.
so,
Judy Jantz wrote her very best book, in my opinion, always has been her very best book for me. It's called Hour of the Hunter. And it involves, if you recall, an Indian school, but it's the, trying to remember, it's down by South, right. Yep, it's down in southern Arizona. I'm trying to remember the tribe that, Tohono O'odham, thank you. Yep, I actually practiced pronouncing that so I could do that with you. So, you know, as you say, with 300 and some of them, they were all over. And, it, you know, it reminds me of the old Jesuit mantra, you know, give me a child until he's 7 and, you know, I will always have him. And I think that was part of the theory behind the Indian school was that if you could take a young child and have that intense 7 years, then you know, and now I find it really fascinating that, you know, when Tony published The Blessing Way was 1973, 74, something like that. He couldn't do that today. Nobody would let him publish. A non-Navajo author could not publish The Blessing Way today. Just can't happen because there are now own voices coming along. So now we have David Webley Wyden, who's a wonderful author. And we just had Ramona Emerson, who is a Navajo living in Albuquerque, who's written a book. And so, you know, I feel like Tony and Margaret and James Doss, who wrote about the Ute, do you remember that? They kind of opened the way, but part of it was there weren't any actual Native Americans writing crime fiction. It isn't their literary form.
No, it was an oral history an awful lot of the time. Like it, so even a written, you know, communication like that was kind of a, you know, an oddity.
Right. So I think of them as opening the way, you know, and now there are people stepping into it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I know I'm all for that because but I thought that the authors who did do that, like Tony and Jim and Margaret and whatever, knocked themselves out to do a good job. And, you know, and whenever we would talk to them, you and I did, how many events with Margaret Cole? You know, the Arapaho really liked her, you know.
Oh, yeah, I was on a panel with David, actually, like that, you know, about, you know, cultural appropriation, like that. And we all kind of came to the same conclusion was that as long as it's done with respect, as long as it's done, you know, the best way that it possibly can be, that you're not just using, you know, a certain amount of people for just like set dressing, you know, for whatever it is that you're doing. Like, then as long as it's respectful, like, and the research has been done, there aren't any problems with that. Like,
but how about if nobody's doing it at all?
Well, then you got a real problem on your hands.
No, but I mean, like with nobody was writing, you know, crime fiction with Navajo characters. So why not Tony?
Well, and that kind of like opens up the question also, like that as far as like, you know, the whole idea of Western crime fiction, like you know, then I think that, you know, you got to give credit where credit's due. I think Tony is kind of responsible, you know, for that to a great extent. Like, you know, he's the one that, like, you know, really made it palatable to be able to write, you know, murder mysteries that took place in the West.
I read him in real time, you know, because I'm so old that I've read all these authors in real time. Ross McDonald I read in real time, E.D. Chan, whatever. But it was interesting. Ramona Emerson was a little, I think, hesitant to endorse Tony, but she was writing about Navajo spirits and so forth. And if you've read The Blessing Way, that would have been the first time you probably ever knew about why, you know, how they feel about ghosts and, you know, Chindi and why the Hogans have to be, you know, open when somebody dies and then you don't go back and all. So I don't think that I would have enjoyed Ramona's book if I hadn't already read Tony, you know. And I think it's important for people. I mean, he's become historical fiction, right? Do you realize it's going to be 50 years next year and he wrote The Blessing Way. So if the bar of historical history is maybe 50 years, it's moved. In the time I've had this bookstore, it has moved from the 1930s to the 1970s. How scary is that? Some of you are seniors, so you'll sympathize with how I feel about watching my life actually become history. But you know, I think you have to respect the way the authors wrote was true for them at the time. And it'd be like taking Raymond Chandler and taking out all the racist words. You know? I mean, they are offensive today, but they weren't when he wrote them.
I think there's that.
And what do you do?
But the thing, whenever the leering head of, like, you know, cultural appropriation raises itself up, the first thing I always think of is there was the Pulitzer Prize speech that Steinbeck gave, like, where he said, you know, any good literature approaches a universality of the human condition. And the whole idea being that, like, one of the reasons why we read all these different books, the reasons why we approach all these different books, like, it is because, you know, we're looking to discover more about people that are different from ourselves. And the other direction is kind of a dead end. I mean, when you really get down to it, I mean, if natives are only allowed to write about natives, if white people are only allowed to write about white people, like, if women are only allowed to write about women, if men are only, nobody's going to write about horses. This is going to get stupid really quick, you know. And the thing is, I don't think it really helps the situation either, like that, because I mean, the whole idea is to reach out and understand each other and have an understanding and an empathy, you know, for each other. And if you don't cross those boundaries, like that, then, you know, you're not getting the full picture of these novels anyways.
Those of you who get the e-news saw that I quoted an author, and I thought she said a really wonderful thing. Among all the other benefits that come with people who read, is that it makes you a nicer person. Empathy. I think it's true.
Yeah.
You know, that it does. The more you learn about people different than you, the more empathetic you can be and the more tolerant you can be.
I agree.
So I really, you know, really like that. So what are you working on now?
Oh my goodness, let's see. Is there going to be another Walt Longmire book? Okay.
Well, he ruined the ending. Walt survives. Oh, huge spoiler.
There's a reviewer that a wonderful young man I did an interview with out of Spokane here just yesterday, like, and he was like, "Yeah, I read your book. It's kind of scary because, you know, I don't know if Walt's going to make it or not." Like, and I was like, I said, that's kind of the point. Like, I said, you know, if you do these books, I mean, you know, you have to be honest about it and say, okay, you know, if you're going to really be honest about the characters and to the reader and all of this, you know, that with what the business that Walt's involved in, it's always going to be a possibility he won't make it through the next book. You know, it's just like anybody in law enforcement that puts on that belt, like that, the pins on that badge, they may not come home that night. Like, and so you have to approach the work with that same ideal. But then I also told him, I said, but then I would have like people with pitchforks and torches out in front of my house, like, you know, up in Wyoming, like, if I kill Walt off,
the population of Yukos
would turn on me, like,
that's right.
all 20, let's see, what would it be now? 24 of them. Like, we went up one. It's 26 now. So, but yeah, you know, you have to, you know, realize, like, that, you know, that's always going to be an option, like that, and that might happen. But having said that, like that, I'll go on ahead into the next book. I'll get and tell you what's going on with that. You guys, anybody remember Elmer, was it Keith? I think Elmer Keith, like, the ballistics guy that wrote all of those really wonderful books about, you know, guns and everything in the 50s and 60s and everything. There was this one story that he told, like that, you know, kind of, you know, caught my imagination. And I thought, that sounds like something Walt Longmire would be involved with. And basically what happens is that Walt's on a search and rescue up in the Bighorns. And he's looking for this woman whose car they find, like, but they can't find her. But she's, you know, called on her cell phone. They know she's up there somewhere. They try to track her down. And he finally finds her, like that, you know, and but then he has to get up on a high rock spot to be able to get out. He has to borrow her cell phone to do it, and gets up on top of the rocks up there to call out and get somebody to, you know, come and get them. And as he's sitting there on this clump of rocks up there on this ridge, like that, he's looking around, and it looks familiar to him. And the reason it looks familiar to him is he goes back in time to this point in time when his father and he were at an elk camp and they were hunting elk. And his father, he tells him, have I ever told you about the first man I ever saw killed? And Walt says, no, look at, and so he tells him the story. And of course, what the story is there's this man that after the war, World War II, came back from Battle of the Bulge, wanted to go, get an elk, for the winter. And so they take him, up on the mountain to get this elk. Well, then two of his friends say they would like to come and possibly go, on this trip too. And the guy's killed. The guy's killed. You come to find out that he was the state accountant for the state of Wyoming. And the problem is how he was killed was with a weapon that nobody at the elk camp had. 300 H&H Magnum. Nobody was carrying that. So who is it that did it? And so, as they're sitting there making this phone call, dog is digging around underneath the rocks after something. And, Walt's calling him out and saying, it's a marmot, leave it alone. Well, then the dog comes out and he's got a piece of leather. Looks like either a piece of tack or, a rifle sling or something. It reaches down in there and pulls this thing out, and it's this 300 H&H Magnum. And through process of elimination, Walt discovers that the owner of that rifle was his grandfather.
Stop right there. But great beginning. I like that. All right. So Walt makes it home, which I really love. But you're right. I think to keep yourself interested, you do have to sort of, go off piste, as we say.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, if it's not going to hold my interest for a year,
exactly,
it ain't going to hold your guys' interest either. And in this book, it's interesting because, Walt, who I think is the most ecumenical, detective on the face of the earth. He's the living embodiment of innocent until proven guilty. He starts this investigation on his grandfather. He's out to get him.
Ooh, gosh, we have to wait a whole year. How cool is that? Right. Well, maybe we should ask for questions, since we probably have said more than we should say about either book. Who would like to ask a question? Just stick up your hand. I'll let you choose. This is your show.
Sure.
The Evolution TV series had characters portrayed by different people, different ways. Do you have favorites, specifically Bear?
Yeah, they always approach these things a little bit differently than anybody else does. And I know I've told this story before, but I'll give you the Reader's Digest version of it. I remember when they were first doing the casting, the producer said, we're thinking about making the actors about Henry and Walt about 10 years younger than they are in your books. And I had the redneck cowboy response, well, now why are we doing that? and they said, well, because we'd really like the show to run for about 10 years, and we'd rather not have Walt and Henry on walkers, by the time we get to the end. And so, they have reasons, for what it is that they do when they change things like that. And Lou does a great job as the character. He really captures, I think, the humor and the spirituality of the character. Does he capture the physicality of the character? Maybe not, because, Henry's 6'5", weighs 230, 240. He's built like a Greek god, he was a fullback, for Berkeley, and all of this. I've actually got a few notes on the book that's coming, the one after that one. There's this one point where he and Walt have to do this road trip all the way from California because he was in Berkeley and Walt was at USC, but they lose their deferment and they're drafted and they're going to have to go all the way across the country on Route 66, part of it, all the way because Henry's going to Louisiana for Special Operations Group training, and Walt's, of course, going to end up Paris Island. And as they're on their way, they're getting ready to leave and Henry picks up, Walt's book. It's laying. They're in this old ranch truck driving all the way across the country, and he reaches over and picks it up. And it's Dostoevsky, and he says, "What are you doing?" This is Walt's it's a little bit of summer reading, and he throws it out the window, and Walt's like, "Did you just throw Dostoevsky out the window?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's not summer reading. We're not going to read depressing things And so, but I think that he captures a lot of that humor that's in that character that. But it's tough to do the physicality, of the characters an awful lot of the time. We were lucky because Robert's about 6'3" or 4, weighs about 220, and so he's a big guy. But there are always going to be changes that they're going to do, to make it more of what will be palatable for them as far as a television show is concerned. Could because like Walt in the books is a refrigerator with a head. I mean, he was an offensive lineman for USC, and they played in a Rose Bowl. And so he's like 6'6", weighs like, 250, 60, something like that, And the reason for that, of course, is that, a lot of the Wyoming sheriffs and Montana sheriffs that I know are really big guys, because you have counties in Wyoming that are as big as Maryland. And you have a limited resource as far as your staff is concerned, as far as backup is concerned. And I've seen what happens, when a big animal comes into a room, all the little animals pay better attention. And so, it kind of works a little bit better to have him be that, that big like that. But yeah, I mean, some of the changes that they made, I was, and even some of the characters that they came up with like that. I mean, A. Martinez, the job that he does, as Jacob Nighthorse, like I think he's absolutely fabulous in that role. And just amazing. Zahn McClarnon is another one. I mean, that character's female in the books, and I think he does a grand job, playing that role. But we were lucky. We had really, really, really good actors, and that's, I think, what it comes down to. If somebody walks in and they're really good, you cast them. If they don't look exactly the way the person's supposed to be, in the novel, they don't care, because they're going to get the best performers that they can. And there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is that writers, TV writers, are just the same as anybody else. If, they sense that like an actor isn't really that good, they're not going to write for that actor. If they get a feeling that that actor is really good, they're going to write for that actor. And so we were lucky, and there was this broad base of really good actors, and so a lot of the storylines could go in a lot of different ways and not feel hampered. So
you don't have a rub?
now, how do you mean?
Like when Bear pulls the wall out with one hand and pulls the river and saves his life.
Right.
You don't have a rub about that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, there are things like I looked at and was not happy with, or things that I thought, that's not realistic. That wouldn't happen. But I think that's also another, big step in your abilities as a writer, is to know, what your limitations are as to what, you have, say in. I mean, they wanted me to, they wanted me to come and be in the writer's room in Los Angeles when I was talking to him. And I said, I don't think that's a really good idea. First of all, I have to go live in Los Angeles for months at a time, which I don't think would work out well. The other thing is like, who wants the novelist in the room? I mean, you got like 5 or 6 TV writers, and then you got the one guy sitting in the room that's like doing this, going, no. It wouldn't happen like that, and I'll explain why. We don't want that guy in the room. So I think, you just have to be open to the idea that it's a different form, that it's a different performance kind of form, and realize that there are going to be some differences, in what it is that you put on that page. So
Think about Elmore Leonard, who said that selling your book to the movies was like a car. When it was yours, you drove it, and when you sold it, somebody else got to drive it. And that's it.
That's pretty great.
And he sold a lot of books.
Yeah, sold a lot of cars, man.
He did. He really did. Right. So can you repeat the question when it comes in? Because
Sure,
it's hard
sure.
for the audience to.
Somebody else? Yes.
Yeah. Way back when, how did you decide on the character of a small county sheriff? I mean, how did that come about?
How did I decide on a small county sheriff? About 20 years ago, and Barbara can back me up on this, everything was noir. Everything was like alcoholic detectives, divorced, who buried bodies in their backyards, and everything was like really urban and gritty and all this. And all I could think was, all the guys and women that I know that are in law enforcement are really good people, and they work really hard, make a lot of sacrifices in their lives, to do what it is that they do. And I thought, what if you did something different, and in that way, being a writer is like being a cop, like that. I mean, if everybody's running in one direction, you probably need to be running in the other direction. And so I thought, well, what if you did, what if you did something where the protagonist was the sheriff of the least populated county, in the least populated state, Wyoming. We have 500,000 people in the whole state, 9th largest state. And I thought that would be something different. That would really force you to deal more with the characters and their relationships, and the world, that they're in. It also will provide certain hurdles to get over. I'm always laughing when people ask me, why doesn't Walt carry a cell phone? And I'm always like, you've never been to Wyoming, have you? I mean, yeah, it works on I-80 and I-25, but that's about it, You can take pictures of you with the antelope and buffalo, if you can get them taken quick before they run over top of you. But, to me, that, it seemed, kind of obvious that it would be something very, very different from the stuff that had been done before. And then the question became okay, well, how do you utilize some of those tropes, like, and some of those, really strong images that we have of the American West, and of that cowboy mythos and all of that, but transport that into a modern era, where Walt has to deal, with a much more complex world, than, maybe Roy Rogers ever did. And so that was kind of fun for me, I thought, and so that's always going to be the big thing too. If I think, okay, I might enjoy writing that, then maybe I can write it. So
actually, a pertinent question would be, had you written anything else before you thought about writing?
I have, and nobody will ever see any of it, ever. So.
I tried. I've been up in his writing, sneaking around, right? You know what I always love is writers say, no, it's in a drawer, I'll never show it to you, but I want to say, burn it, because if it's there, somebody someday will read it. Patrick, you must have Patrick will emerge now because he has questions from the internet audience.
Yeah, let's see here. Well, kind of related to what you just asked, Barbara, do you have any ambitions to write things outside of Walt's world?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I've actually started a few novels like that don't have Walt in them, like that. I've got a psychological thriller that I've started, like that. I've got a literary fiction piece, like that. And then I've got an actual Western, like that I'm writing, which came from. I've got a little cabin up in the Bighorns, like it, and it was actually the headquarters for the National Order of Cowboy Rangers. And this was like a social order, for cowboys and rangers, turn of the century. And the little spot where I've got my cabin, the little building, everything's called Lodge 34, Ranch 34. And it's actually infamous like that because in 1917, when Buffalo Bill Cody died in Denver, he had requested that his body be returned to Wyoming and be buried there. And his wife and sister got together and decided they were going to get him buried in Colorado and keep him down there. As a matter of fact, they actually, when they finally did bury him in Lookout Mountain, they put 14 feet of concrete over top of him because they knew Wyoming would come down and dig him up in the middle of the night and haul him back. Because they'd offered, I think it was the American Legion, offered a $5,000 reward for the return of the body of Buffalo Bill. This is 1917 dollars, so that was quite a bit of money. And the my little lodge is famous because in 1917, in January, they dispatched 4 riders to go down and get the body of Buffalo Bill and bring it back. And of course, we all know he's buried at Lookout Mountain in Colorado, right? Or is he? And
I try to wrap my head around the fact I've been to Ucross, I've seen Craig, population 26. That from that he had to have a more isolated place.
Get away from it all. Okay? The hustle
Really?
and the bustle of Ucross, it just gets to be too much. All 26 of those people out driving around in circles. Okay, it's like, so.
Another question there, Patrick?
Well, someone is asking about, the TV show's done so phenomenally well. Have there been options made on like feature film adaptations of Walt?
Well, they can't like that because Warner Brothers owns us. Like it's just as simple as that. Like after they did 62 episodes or something like that, we were locked into Warner Brothers. Now there are worse things than being locked into the biggest, production studio in the world like that. But it'll be interesting to see what they do, what they decide to do. I also know that if that sweetheart deal with Netflix comes to an end, that Warner Brothers is working on their own streaming services. And so seems to me they would be smart enough to figure out that one of the greatest successes they've had in the last, 12 years is this little cowboy and Indian show, and maybe they should think about doing it some more. So we'll see what happens.
You can't just call him Wallace Longmire.
No. Right. There's a live audience question. Let's try that one.
Not to give anything away. Do we get to see Virgil in this book?
Yes, you do.
We get to see Virgil.
Actually,
I don't want to give away too much.
No, but I made a mistake. I was thinking about that. I said when you see Henry standing there that something. It's not. It was Virgil. Is what I meant.
Yes.
When Virgil shows up, then you know that the universe is.
I'm not going to ruin
wonky.
it for you like that, but when Walt's sitting there waiting for his grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup, which is the special at the cafe, and while he's waiting like that, and she's back there fixing it and everything like that, this guy comes in. And he's 7'2", and he's dressed like a mountain crow. He walks right by Walt and goes over to the next stool and sits down. Walt tries to talk with him. He doesn't say anything to him. And then the woman, Martha comes out, like it gives him his food and everything like that. And Walt's like nodding towards this guy, and she can't see him. He's like he's not really there. And then he gets up, like, and he starts to walk towards the door, and then he turns around and looks at Walt and goes, "Shh. Sometimes it's better to sleep than to awake," and then goes out the door.
Virgil. I love Virgil. Virgil doesn't appear that often.
No, he's big backup. So
Another question over there?
When the spirit moves him, he appears.
exactly.
That's right.
A question about your own favorite writers and reading tastes.
Oh gosh.
Eclectic.
Like yeah,
I can answer that one.
I can.
right?
I go in so many different directions like that. Right now I'm reading that wonderful biography of Jim Thorpe. Let's
That's a
see.
very good book.
Yeah, an amazing book. I mean, we kind of live. I'm sitting here looking, also seeing Travels with George, the Nathaniel Philbrick book, like that, and we're really, really fortunate to live in a period in time like that when a lot of of historical nonfiction writers are really good writers.
They are.
and that was not always the case.
I know. And
so.
I hated losing David McCullough.
Yeah.
Lovely man. I met him a few times, and he was a wonderful stylist as well, and
yeah.
researcher.
Because it's not just the facts, and the dates and all that. It's how you tell the story, like
That's
that.
right.
And so they kind of figured that out in nonfiction, which is really kind of wonderful. Like, and then they're like always my favorites. Like, I got to do an article about they asked all this Wyoming authors like what we thought about banning books, and of course I'm against banning books. Like, I'm kind of for books like that, and it was funny because like 1984 is the most banned book in the United States, and I'm like, what? You're banning 1984? So you're for fascism? You're for torturing people and and Big Brotherism and all this kind of stuff? I'm like, I'm always asking myself when people ban a book, I'm like, have you read it, or did you just like read the blurb on the outside or something like that?
It's a very surprising list. Banned Book Week starts on September 15th, and it's always interesting to look at the list of books that have been banned over time. I still can hardly wrap up my
Well, I love your
mind about
banner right
where
there
the
in the
wild
window.
things, yeah, where the wild things are. I mean,
It's
seriously.
just nutty.
Great how it backfires too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Turns them into bestsellers.
Oh yeah,
I know.
yeah. As soon as you tell young people not to read that, they're all going to run out and buy a copy. Like, it's simple as that. But yeah, I mean, it's like with Steinbeck. I laugh like that because whenever you go to Salinas, like in California, they've got the Steinbeck Center right there, and it's beautiful, absolutely amazing facility like that. But I'm also fully aware that just across the street in the town square in the 30s, they burned his books. So things do change like that, and you hopefully will move out of this foolishness like that and get away from it.
Extremism zigzags.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yes.
You brought up a lot of issues with the natives following your books that you brought up before, and the latest seems to be all these disappearing. We were just up in Wyoming and we saw all these flyers about all these missing women and children and stuff. Is there any other issues that you think you need to bring up? Because we never know about this stuff, and actually, you've introduced me to some of this.
Oh, thank you.
Is there any other issues that you?
I guess the question is like, I guess what other issues like I want to deal with from that little portion of our world. Like, I mean, to me, that's always the key element there. Like that, because Judy was making fun of me like that because I was working on the the murdered missing Indigenous women's resource idea like that a couple of years before it kind of really started getting some traction. I like to think that we had an effect in doing that. Like in Longmire days, actually from like we actually gave $30,000 like to the murdered missing Indigenous women's resource center up in Lame Deer, like which I'm really very proud of. But we've had like she makes fun of me sometimes because she's like, well, do you have like some kind of like crystal ball that you look in to try and find topical things to write about? Like, and I don't think that's it. I think what it is that I'm just trying to be honest with Walt, where he's having to deal with social issues that affect that part of the world, where I'm from. I've said it numerous times. I don't ever want to have Walt chasing Al Qaeda in Crook County. I don't ever want to have Walt on a cruise ship, or something stupid like that. I mean, I want him dealing with the things that Western sheriffs kind of have to deal with. And I think as long as you're trying to get your finger on that particular pulse, it gives you opportunities to be able to seek out some of those issues and deal with them. Like that, I tend to refer to it as the burr under the saddle blanket school of literature. And in that sense, what it means is like that burr's under the saddle blanket. It's annoying the horse and it's annoying me, and so something's going to have to happen. And so for me, that'll always be kind of a guiding light as far as that's concerned. Gentleman had his hand up a couple of times back here. Yes, sir.
You mentioned Daughter of the Morning Star, your previous book.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have it here, so I ordered it. But should you read that first before you read the next one?
It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt
Not a
to have
bad
read that
idea.
one like that before.
I'm really sorry. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that keep going wrong with the supply chain, but the one that caught us all by surprise was the collapse of the bridge on I-10 in the flood. Did you know? So the normal way that books come down here from Oregon and Reno, which is where the two major warehouses are, there it went because they can't get across the bridge. So, I went to order stuff and it can't get here in time anyway. And I mean, I'm serious, it's really hard to deal with some of this
That's
stuff at
crazy
the moment.
to
Well,
think about that.
and it washed out before, remember? When there was, so you would think that they would have like a makeshift steel bridge or something. It's not over a chasm. It's really not. So you would think there would be some way that ADOT could, or maybe it's California. I can't remember where the bridge is, but coming down from Reno, which is where the major Random House warehouse is, which is his publisher, it has to detour now, and so everything takes too long, and it's also Labor Day, so that screws up delivery. So we don't have. We're not in sync as well as we once were. And there's not
that pretty
anything
much
I can do
explains the
about
whole
it.
country right now. We're trying to
Well-
figure some of these things out, like that, and eventually we will.
Yeah, but you don't expect to get sabotaged by the highway system.
That's true. Usually there's another way around.
I
like that,
know.
so. But in answer to your question, like that, it's not absolutely necnecessary, like that, for you to read Daughter of the Morning Star
No,
before.
but it's a good idea if you can. So if we ordered it, it'll eventually be here. Right.
The
Anybody
gentleman
else?
with the beard all the way in the far back had his hand up.
He
like
had
that.
his hand up
He's
there.
engaged in conversation now. Like
Maybe
that's,
Larry's going to answer the question.
maybe. Maybe.
All right,
Anybody else?
Is there a final?
Now's your chance.
Right. Sir, what is
Yeah.
your question?
Uh-huh.
Ah,
A
hookup for Henry.
Yeah, like Henry's romantic life is pretty well described by Walt in the very first book, The Cold Dish, where he says Henry is the dog that would not stay on the porch. And he cuts a wide swath, as he moves along through life, like it. And so it's kind of funny with that character, like that, because Walt, on the other hand, is not a very smooth operator at all, like it. And so, he could take a few lessons from Henry, truth to be told, like that. So.
Right. Was there one more back there? I thought I saw. Nope. Well, in that case, we have come. Oh, sorry, Patrick. You have one more?
Yeah, we have a lot of international people watching online, which is really cool. And one of our regulars, Stefania, again from Italy.
At least she's not at 3 a.m, which is when
Yeah,
she's normally
like
at
2
that time. Hi,
she says,
Stefania.
yeah, she says, Mr. Johnson, you're just like the cowboys I see in the movies, which is a nice comment. But how you're very popular in France, right?
Yeah,
and
very.
Also in Italy, or
Yeah. We're translated, I think, about 27 different languages, but boy, France is the
France,
huge
yeah.
one.
But you know what? The French always loved Buffalo Bill. I mean, he was huge in France. He toured over there and all kinds of
Yeah,
things.
I think, to a certain extent, like that, he, was responsible with all those Wild West shows, like that, for kind of implanting that imagery of, the wild American West, like that. And it's kind of interesting because I also have to give credit where credit's due. I've got a really incredible French publisher and a really incredible French translator, Sophia Salonides, like at Gaumeister Editions, and they do a pretty amazing
Yeah,
job.
they
And
do.
what I've learned is, in the more languages that I get translated into, that you kind of live or die by your translation. You get a good translation, you get a good book. If you get a bad translation, you get a bad book. And so it's been interesting to see, what's happened. But yeah, it's always a little bit of a surprise. Like, because if somebody would have told me, oh yeah, these books you're going to write about the sheriff of the least populated county, least populated state, going to be a runaway hit in a foreign country, maybe France wouldn't have been the first guess, that I would have
Good
come up
point.
with. Like that.
And that's an interesting point, because we've said we have this huge international audience, and they buy books that are published and written in English. But I think for many of them, they don't actually read them. They read them in their own language because they're published in their own language, but it's kind of like owning an art print or something, So I don't assume automatically that when a book goes off to, like yesterday, one went to Jakarta, one went to Reykjavik. It's fun to watch it. I love watching it every day where they're going. I don't assume that they are buying them to read them. I think they're buying them to own them,
Wow.
which is a whole different thing, but really very nice.
Mm-hmm,
I
very.
like it. And publishing's become a lot more international. And crime, which is basically, crime fiction is really a British and American construct, but now it's spread all over. And people are writing in their native languages and being translated into English. So I think it's great that it's working in all ways. So we've come to the moment in which I give away a book as part of the thank you for your coming today.
You're not going to give away that arc? You're not going to give
I
that
could
away?
do that too. Although by now they bought the book, so it's not going to be self-defeating. Right. So you should have a number in your books. Larry, where are we? 45? 47. Thank you. All right, so I need you to pick a number between 1. Notice I put the onus on him. I don't do this. Between 1 and 47.
21.
21. All right, so you have to be here in order to win it. Sometimes people don't show up. It's you.
Ah!
And this wonderful man has driven for hours to get here. So would you rather have the Johnson or would you like to have the brand new book? I mean, the different book. You get a choice.
I want to put Craig up with my
You want that one.
John Grisham.
This lovely man comes up from southern Arizona.
You know what? They're not printing arcs anymore, so that's
And
probably
they
a
give
collector's
books away
item, to
at
be
the
honest with you. Like I
library,
said.
which I think is
Expensive to produce.
Yeah, they are.
All right, so now you have to pick another number because we have another book.
22.
22. Oh, way back there. All right, so this is a outdoor mystery by natural history writer Griffith, bringing back Sam Rivers, the predator's predator, to investigate an unexplained cougar attack in the Minnesota River Valley outside the Twin Cities. So it's a trade paperback, and it's just coming out. So I'm giving it to you, and if you're interested in it, you bet. We can order more.
My pleasure. My pleasure. She held up her fingers. Tell me.
Oh, okay. All right. So I want to wish you all